right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to our July Lunch and Learn presentation, Tales from the Collection. My name is Travis Buterbaugh, and I'm the curator of collections here at the Orange County Regional History Center. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us here in person, and also everyone joining us on the live webinar. We'll make sure to leave some time at the end for questions, and for those of you joining online, feel free to leave your questions in the chat, and Cheyenne can relay those to me at the end. For those of you in attendance, you may notice there's some Post-it notes on your table. If you have a question, you may write a question on one of the sheets in front of you, and then we'll be collecting them towards the end of the program. Please be sure to hold any comments until the end of the presentation, but applause is always welcome. Or laughter, thank you. Today you'll be hearing from 6 members of our team: our assistant curator of collections, our historian, our archivist, our collections manager, and 2 of our museum technicians. They will each give you insight into the work that they conduct as members of the collections department, using examples from their own experiences over the last year. Through their presentations, you will see how diverse each of their positions are and the kind of work that they perform. We hope you leave here today with a better understanding of their positions and the work that we do here at the museum. So without any further ado, let's hear some tales from the collection. Our first speaker of the afternoon is our Assistant Curator of Collections, Jeremy Heilman.
Hey, how's it doing? How's it going today, everybody? Great. So as Travis mentioned, I am the Assistant Curator of Collections here at the History Center, and I'm very lucky because I get to do a lot of things that I really enjoy in this role. And one of the things that are like kind of my favorite part of that is seeking out artifacts or oral histories for our collection that we don't already have. It's a really good way to kind of meet people in our community and connect with those that we may not have otherwise gotten to do. And then, using those collections items in interesting and sort of unique ways to sort of prop up that history and tell that story. So collection items don't just have to be the things that are on the shelf. They can be a whole lot more than that. So one prime example of that is our current special exhibition, which is on the 2nd floor here, just kind of right outside for those of you who are here in attendance, called Figurehead Music and Mayhem in Orlando's Underground. And the sort of origin story with that is that in 2019, I met local music promoter Jim Faraday and developed a little bit of a relationship with him. We ended up doing an oral history with him, which led to a donation of items from his company, Figurehead, hence the name Figurehead, which was pretty sizable in that it included hundreds of concert posters, releases from his Figurehead record label, documents, contracts, all kinds of different things that we didn't have in our collection already. So with this new material, we decided to do an exhibition that would not just display this material, but also allow us to kind of dive into this history that hadn't previously been represented by our institution. So we did these oral history interviews with a lot of the musicians, the people who designed the posters, people who own the clubs that the musicians played in, and just a lot of facilitators of that kind of music scene at the time in town. So the exhibit covers relatively recent history from 1985 to 2001. And in terms of the time period covered and also the subject matter, it's a little unconventional for an institution like ours, but it's been very successful, and the kind of risk with that has really paid off. So in order to sort of celebrate that exhibit and mark the 1-year anniversary of it being open, we planned an entire weekend of events kind of based on that exhibition. And because at that time we decided to extend the run of the exhibit and keep it open longer, we decided to name it Figurehead Encore Weekend, with encore being kind of a play on the concert lingo. So what was Figurehead Encore Weekend? It was a sort of 3-part event over several days. Friday night, we did a downtown walking tour of venues that were significant in Figurehead's history. Along with us, museum staff, Jim Faraday himself of Figurehead accompanied us, as well as a few others who were really vital in the history of that company. And then on Saturday night, kind of the biggest component was a concert featuring a lineup of artists that were really significant to both Figurehead as a company and Figurehead the exhibit. and we called that Figurehead Night Out. And then on Sunday, we had a bit of a calmer affair to kind of cap off the weekend called the Morning After Brunch, which featured breakfast and a performance solo by an Americana artist who's very popular here locally named Terry Binion. So kind of moving on to this slide, you'll see we have a display from the exhibit here at the History Center. And for those of you who have seen it, this photo is a display of events that happened in the 1980s that the company put on called Figurehead Night Out. So in 1987, Figurehead put together a package show of local artists. And while that in itself isn't particularly groundbreaking, the way they presented it was very unique in that they really went out of their way to make a special event out of it. So you'll see a shirt there with all the band names that were performing at that first event in 1987. They did posters. They just really, wanted it to be like a must-see thing, and it's a very sort of significant and legendary thing within the Orlando music community. So we kind of decided that since we were doing something similar and featuring local artists, that we would also call our event Figurehead Night Out. It would be the 4th edition, and we got the blessing from Jim Faraday to do so and proceeded on from there. So the task of kind of figuring out who would play and getting them secured for the night was kind of the next big step and probably the biggest challenge of the whole weekend. And we also wanted to book people who people wanted to come see. So the first person who agreed to play was a musician named Stephen Foxberry, who was in a band called My Friend Steve, who was very popular here locally, but also gained some national prominence. And his band actually performed at the grand opening ceremony here at the History Center back in 2000. And coincidentally, that was the last show that band ever played. So kind of a full circle thing. And he traveled all the way from Pittsburgh to come play the show here. So you see him represented there. I also spoke to a local musician who's very legendary in the scene called, his name is Dave Ewing. And he's been in a lot of very prominent local bands, maybe the most notable which being the Hate Bombs, who are featured in our exhibit, and asked him if he wanted to play, and he did, and he actually offered us a reunion of one of his previous bands, the Riddlers, who had not played together since 1991, so it was a really special thing to get them. And then I also spoke to a gentleman named Greg Rennell, who is a graphic artist who had done a lot of the Figurehead posters, also played in some local bands, and he wanted to play, but he doesn't currently have a band that he performs with. So the last time that he had done a show was with another local band named the Tremolords, and he had sort of taken over vocal duties for that. So the idea was that he wanted to play with them, and it was very convenient because the Tremolords also featured Dave Ewing, who is in the band the Riddlers. So Dave did us a real solid in both organizing both bands, which, several musicians over several bands would be a little bit of a challenge, but he was able to do that for us, and then also kind of performed double duty that night and played twice. So it was a really cool thing. And so you see over here the actual concert poster for our event, kind of based off of a exhibit of concert posters. That was designed by our former director, Pam Schwartz, and everybody who came to the show got to take this home at the end. So everyone was handed one on their way out. So a cool little memento, commemorating the event itself. So these are some photos for the weekend, kind of wrapping this up. The walking tour was really cool. You see there, it was a sort of an intimate thing, but we got to go to the Beecham Theater. We got to go to the Social, which used to be the Sapphire Supper Club, which Jim Faraday of Figurehead used to own. And then the next night, Figurehead Night Out, you see some shots from those performances. It was really an amazing time. It was a sold-out show. We had over 200 people in the building, so it was pretty packed. Kind of up at the top right there, you see the Riddlers in their sort of reunion shot taken by legendary local photographer Jim Leatherman, who coincidentally also played in the Riddlers for a little bit. You see Greg Rennell and the Tremolords there, just really energetic, cool guys, so it was a lot of fun, and they really were sort of crowd favorites. And then Stephen Foxberry, who really doesn't play shows too often. He's kind of semi-retired from playing live, but I think that a lot of the people here kind of came to see him specifically, and it really meant a lot to the people who had grown up with his music. And then finally, you see Terry over there from our morning after brunch. She's just really amazing and has done some great things for us here at the History Center and has really become a friend to our institution. So it was really great to see people have so much fun, but also kind of recognize the importance of their contributions to both our sort of music culture and our local history. And it really is sort of a case of one thing leads to another as far as collections go. All this kind of happened, the exhibit itself and this weekend, because of an oral history interview and a donation to our collection. So one way that we can kind of utilize this material to do something a little bit bigger. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, our museum technician, Liz Castillo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Castillo, and I've been a museum technician at the History Center for about 7 months now. The grand majority of what I do involves working behind the scenes, cataloging, processing, and housing items in both our library and object collections. Recently, I've been inventorying a unique collection involving hazardous materials consisting of medications that are dated between the early to mid-1900s. This was a time where pharmaceutical knowledge was not as refined as it is today, and as a result, no possible remedy was off the table. Although I was aware of this to an extent, some of the ingredients I came across while sifting through this collection were quite questionable, to say the least. So we often point to opium in reference to outdated medicine, but through our inventory process, I came across oral and topical medications that contained ingredients like camphor, chloroform, and henbane, all of which were phased out of medicinal use due to their lethality. At the time, many of these lethal ingredients flooded the American landscape, becoming integral remedies for aches, pains, coughs, and even teething babies. These experimental practices, although widely used as cures, were also applied to remedies beyond medicine. Within the collection, I came across an oiler can of McElroy's ant poison, which you could see up there, which was an Orlando household staple featuring arsenic as a main ingredient. In researching the origins of McElroy's ant poison, I was shocked to learn of McElroy, his innovative practices, and the integral part he played in Orlando's early history. So James Newton McElroy and his wife, Queen Esther Peel, or Queenie, moved to Orlando from Tennessee in 1881. Within the same year as their move, McElroy opened the Blue Drug Store, seemingly named after its fresh coat of blue paint. The couple established themselves in Orlando and built a 2-story home on the west corner of Lake Lucerne, where their family lived for generations. Located on Orange Avenue and nestled between Church and Pine Street, the Blue Drug Store, later renamed to McElroy's Pharmacy, served the community between 1881 and 1948. It was within those 67 years that McElroy's became a home base for Orlando locals looking for remedies, cosmetics, poisons, and treats. For years, advertisements and specials for McElroy's Pharmacy peppered the local papers, and the success of its products catapulted McElroy's into becoming the largest drug trade in Central Florida. Even in his off time, McElroy spent a large amount of time in front of his kitchen sink inventing many of the remedies that locals quickly learned to rely on. Some of these remedies were medical, including McElroy's nerve liniment, McElroy's liquid sulfur, pine bud cough syrup, and liver pills, while some were used for pests, including McElroy's famous roach paste and ant poison. The pharmacy's skyrocketing popularity soon found it serving the community in a multitude of ways. From home and medical remedies to photo development to delicious food, McElroy's had it all. McElroy's Pharmacy especially became a hub for people looking to escape Central Florida's stark heat. Offering air conditioning, a rarity at the time, and delicious homemade ice cream, McElroy's quickly became renowned for both its products and culinary expertise. The pharmacy's homemade ice cream, which was cranked by hand on wooden ice cream makers, attracted locals and distant visitors alike. In a 2004 article written by Joy Dickinson, she writes about Dr. Robert Saros, who once worked behind the counter at McElroy's Pharmacy. He recalls how to make McElroy's famous chocolate ice cream soda. Starting with a tall glass, he would fill the bottom with chocolate syrup, add 2 scoops of homemade ice cream, fill it with soda water, and top it off with a final spritz of soda water, homemade whipped cream, and a cherry. For years, a stop at McElroy's for ice cream, soda, and other necessary goods was integral to the itineraries of families, school children, tourists, and more. While Atlanta-based soda, Coca-Cola, was gaining worldwide traction in 1914, McElroy served its own homegrown soda. Available alongside Coca-Cola at the McElroy's soda fountains was Dr. R.H. Peake's Palmetto Berry Soda. Dr. Peake would create the soda in his laboratory near the pharmacy after gathering palmetto berries from the local woods. Peake's Palmetto Berry Soda was well loved by locals who made it the most popular drink sold at the pharmacy in that year. The soda, quickly becoming a local favorite, was soon sold alongside the classic Coca-Cola we all know and love in various Orlando locations. Many believe that due to lack of marketing, Dr. Peake missed out on billions, as no soda could compare to this day. The unique recipe was a secret McElroy's exclusive and an addition to the pharmacy's timeless treats. Some of McElroy's notable non-medical remedies and most famous products were McElroy's roach paste and ant poison. On hot, humid days where ants, roaches, and other bugs found their ways into the most unsuitable places, McElroy's products became noteworthy solutions. Dr. Robert Saros also recalls some of his other duties as a McElroy's pharmacy employee, where between shifts, they were sent upstairs to bottle the ant poison, made with arsenic and simple syrup, sitting at a table overlooking Orange Avenue in a hot, unair-conditioned room. The lack of regulations and the potential dangers of working with a chemical like arsenic in an unventilated room, especially when the same person was making ice cream, was clearly a testament of its time. It seems that the risk was worth it, though, because by the 1930s, the poison achieved such success that it was being marketed out of state, with large shipments being distributed at home throughout Florida, in New York, and more. McElroy's was the site of Orlando's first telephone exchange, which connected the pharmacy with nearby businesses including Foster and Reel's Livery Stable, Livingston's Hotel, the Post Office, and the Postmaster's Office, as well as the residencies of Postmaster E.W. Spear and Mayor Mahlon Gore. McElroy's Pharmacy also participated in other Orlando firsts, being the first plate glass storefront and having the first electronic door. The beloved pharmacy even acted as a lead for the mysterious case of Dolores Meyerly's murder in the San Juan Hotel. While the case does remain unsolved, it is believed that the cyanide purchased for the murder was purchased at McElroy's. McElroy and Queenie passed within a week of each other in 1933, handing the business off to their son, James Murley McElroy. He was the president of Orlando Utilities for a number of years and ran the pharmacy until he passed in 1944 and handed the business off to his son, James Newton McElroy Jr., or Jimmy. Dr. Sylvan McElroy, James Murley's brother, was one of the founding doctors of the Orlando Regional Medical Center and Central Florida Medical Society, and also served as the city's physician until his death in 1932. Jimmy closed the pharmacy in 1948, and a women's clothing store by the name of Virginia Dare opened in its place. Although McElroy's Pharmacy is no longer physically present between Church and Pine, or its advertisements taking space within the local papers, its impact is felt to this day through the nostalgic retellings of Ice Cream and Poison. Thank you so much, and please welcome our next speaker, historian Rachel Williams.
Hi, I'm the tallest one, so I gotta adjust this. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay, cool. So my name's Rachel. I'm the historian here. I do quite a few things. I conduct oral histories with people in our community. I also conduct research for various things like social media and blog posts for our museum. I also write articles sometimes for the community paper, which is how I stumbled upon this topic, which led me down a rabbit hole. So in Thornton Park, if you've been to what is currently called Jack and Honey's restaurant, it was previously called the 808, and before that it was Dexter's. Currently in there, there's a photo, this photo, I believe it was also there when it was the 808, and it may have as well when it was Dexter's. But this is a photo of the building that currently houses Jack and Honey's, and it currently also has a little blurb telling a little bit of the history of the building, saying that it is Orlando's first Publix. And I always thought that was interesting, so I thought that I would talk about Orlando's first Publix for my community paper article. So just to show you side by side, this is again the photo that's in Jack and Honey's, and then this is the building itself more recently. You can tell by the windows above the door are the same. You can kind of tell through the awning. And then also the tiling kind of by their legs is the same as well. So it's the same building. So I reached out to Publix historian, because yes, Publix has a historian, if they had more pictures in their collection of this particular Publix location. And this is the photo I received. That's not the same. So the historian from Publix told me that this is the photo, the location that they have saved for the address, 808 East Washington Street. And I thought that was weird because that doesn't look the same. But I did recognize this building. This is actually 634 North Mills Avenue. It's the current Colonial Photo and Hobby, which also is not the first Publix in Orlando, I will say. So I was very confused about this little mystery that I had stumbled upon and thought I'd do a little bit more research, and it turned out to be a pretty interesting article. So I started to dig through some city directories to find some answers. So originally, this Publix store was not at 808 East Washington, it was at 805 East Washington, which is just across the street. And it opened in 1935 at the 805 location, and then by 1840, it had moved across the street to the 808 East Washington location. So this Publix, it was called Publix Market. It was opened by John Bledsoe, B-L-E-D-S-O-E, Bledsoe. I'm pretty sure that's how it's pronounced. So he opened this location, but by 1945, he sold the location. I'm not sure why he called it Publix, but in 1930, there was already a Publix in Winter Haven. And that is the Publix that we know that was opened by George Jenkins. So George Jenkins got his start in grocery stores at Piggly Wiggly. He started out in 1920 as a stalker, he would stock the store, and then he moved up to being a manager, and then decided he'd try his own hand at running his own grocery store. So he opened his first Publix food store, that was the full name, in 1930, and then a second in 1935. That was on the other side of town in Winter Haven. And then by 1940, he opened the first Publix supermarket, which is more closely related to what we know of today when we think of a Publix. So these had a larger product selection, cold cases, air conditioning. So it's more of the standard of convenience that we're familiar with. And then in 1945, Jenkins expanded and he acquired 19 All-American grocery stores from the Lakeland Grocery Company and converted those All-American stores into Publix stores. And it's also during this time, or from this acquisition, that he changes an All-American store at 1114 East Colonial into a Publix. I'm assuming that that location was a little bit small, and this is also during the time that he already had his supermarkets starting, so I think he closed that after a little bit and opened that 634 North Mills, just because it's more aligned with the supermarket So the 808 location, the East Washington location, is not at all affiliated with what we know of as Publix. Again, I'm not sure why John Bledsoe named his Thornton Park grocery store Publix, and how that is just within 5 years of our Publix, if we can call it that, what we know of as Publix. But even in Bledsoe's 1995 obituary, it permeates this idea that that's the first Publix. And while it is technically a Publix, it's not Publix how we know it. It's not the same company. So yeah, that's some of the research and rabbit holes I get to go down. So now we will hear from our archivist, Katie Mara.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Again, my name is Katie Mara. I'm the archivist here at the History Center, and it's basically my responsibility to oversee all the historical records that are housed here and that we collect. So today I'm going to be talking about some of those types of collections. I'm going to be talking about the family collections and some of the cultural resource collections that we have here in the History Center. So family collections, I think we're all pretty familiar and can have a general idea of what these types of collections are. It's basically a collection of items gathered by a family over a certain time period that highlights their personal experiences and life events. These collections are actually very important to an archive because they provide a glimpse into what life was like during that time. It also provides a glimpse of how people lived in a particular region and to see how these people influenced their local, larger community. So one of these family collections that we have here at the History Center, it is the Wooster Family Papers. It is about a family. The couple's names are Ray, he went by Bud. Ray and Anita Wooster. They first moved to Central Florida. They came to Apopka in 1959, and they moved here with their son. And they had influence in their local community, and they also worked in city government. So these are just some examples of this particular collection, from this collection. It's kind of a hodgepodge, kind of some random things, but it really truly tells the story of this family. So Flicks by Wooster, Ray had an entrepreneurial spirit, and he owned and operated his own photography business. So this is his business card, and what's really neat about this, and it's not on the slide, if you flip to the back of it, it actually has kind of like a price schedule. So you see how much he would charge for a 5x7 or an 8x10 or something like that. And of course, it's something like 75 cents or something like that. It's not something that we would be doing today or paying today. But this just shows his local influence here in Central Florida, in Apopka, in Lake County. So this middle one here, Welcome to Cape Kennedy Air Force Station, not only is this a great resource to to learn more about Kennedy, Cape Kennedy, but it also tells the story that the Woosters loved to travel. They were actually part of a motorhome community, and they would travel all over Central Florida and all over the country, and this was one of the places that they went. And there are more of these types of ephemeral items in this particular collection. And what I really like about this particular brochure is when you open it up, it talks about the construction of the VAB, which is the Vehicle Assembly Building, that really big building at Cape Canaveral. It's just a really neat look into the history of the area. Now, this proclamation here, it's kind of like, it's to commemorate Ray's retirement from the city of Apopka. He was a truck driver for the city. And this was just more of a commemorative proclamation that the city council created for him. So it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of funny, but it also provides a lot of personal information related to him and his influence on the community. So another type of collections that we collect here at the History Center are cultural resource collections. Now, these are collections that they really provide a great opportunity for someone to learn more about the culture of a region, of a city. Oftentimes, it's cultural organizations that donate their materials, and we process that and make that accessible. And it really, truly identifies the diversity of the community. So some of the cultural resource collections that we have here pertain to the performing arts. And if we live in Orlando, for example, we know that the performing arts has a really big presence here. So recently, the History Center acquired a collection from the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra. This is me. This is my process, if you will, as an archivist. Not only once we acquire, I have to go through everything, and I like to call this picture "Trust the Process." It's kind of an archivist joke. It's really funny for those of you at home, watching at home. There was a lot of laughter, and you didn't hear it. But it just goes to show you the process of going through a collection and how it can look like chaos. It's controlled chaos, but then it ultimately ends at the very bottom where it's so satisfying and you have this nice collection that's all nice and neat and it's ready to be researched. So a little more about this collection. It mainly consists, because it's from an organization, there are some administrative records, but the true highlight of this collection are all the programs that the Philharmonic donated. There are around 150 different programs that they donated to us. And it just really is a testament to the outreach that they do here in the community in the Central Florida area, and just how much they've done here. So that's about, and I also, before I leave, I wanted to just tell everyone that these are collections that are accessible. They are meant to be researched, so if this is something that you're interested in, we also have other cultural resource collections. We have a lot of family collections. They're some of my favorites. Please stop by and do some research. I'd be happy to help. And so next up, we have our museum technician, Grace Roberts.
I think does this sound okay? Yes? Okay, yeah, all right. Hi everybody, I'm Grace. I'm a museum technician, and that makes it sound like I'm a super pro at technology, and I'm definitely not. My job is actually to organize and catalog our extensive photography collection. As a lot of you probably know, the museum's collection is focused on artifacts that are relevant to Central Florida local history. However, what I love the most about our photography collection is that actually a substantial portion of it is donated from personal family collections. And not all of these images are necessarily of the most historic relevance. A lot of them are pictures just of people's meemaws and papaws and their dogs hanging out at their houses. But personally, I think that those personal images are just as interesting and important, because when we try to visualize people of the past from time periods that we might not have lived through, even if you're a professional historian who's super well educated, you cannot possibly know everything about every demographic that has ever existed. And so, how do humans naturally cope with a lack of information? Well, we kind of, do some assumption making. We kind of fill in the gaps based off our own biases and our own experiences. And so the downside of this is that we might have images in our minds of the way people from certain time periods might have lived based off of our own biases. And the personal family collections are much less curated, I found, than a lot of the images that you will see on Google or even in photography books, because, you know, if you look for vintage early photography online, these are going to be heavily curated images that are given to you in the context of an article. They're normally very professional, very posed, and they're not necessarily the most authentic representation of what people's everyday lives were like. And I think it's important that we pay attention to the more personal images, because they really fill in that gap in our understanding in a way that the more professional photos don't necessarily. So for instance, I had a very particular image in my head of the way that 19th century women must have looked like and lived their lives. And my image wasn't necessarily completely unfounded. It was based off of historical facts about women's social and political limitations compared to men. And so the image that I had in my head of them was based off my idea of how a person would behave under those limited circumstances. And so I certainly never in my life before coming here would have visualized that they went long rifle hunting for bucks, or played competitive team sports, or goofed off in decidedly unladylike ways with their group of gal pals, just like me and my friends. And these pictures really go a lot to humanize these individuals. I think that actually one of the reasons why I wouldn't have been able to imagine these women smiling is because of what I said earlier, which is that our exposure to vintage photography is somewhat limited, and what do we know about early forms of commercial photography? They had long exposure times. So when we think about individuals in the 19th century, we often have a perception of them as being very stiff, very formal all of the time. And I didn't realize that the reason why I had this conception was because I had subconsciously kind of integrated all of these images I had been exposed to of people in these very posed, stiff positions. But in actuality, this was just because those were professional photos taken in a studio where people cannot possibly hold a smile, for hours. That's super uncomfortable. But with the History Center's personal family collections, they were not necessarily aiming for the highest quality images. So we actually get to see people having natural, real expressions and having a lived moment. And I think that that is really exceptional and super interesting to see. So, you might be thinking, other people's dead families, why should we care? And the answer to that is that just because you're not biologically related to an individual does not mean that you don't have a meaningful connection to them. I know for myself, I think of these families as my ancestors, in the sense that these are all examples of early Central Floridian families. And I am a native born and bred Central Floridian. And when we look at these individuals who represent communities that we identify with, who maybe remind us of ourselves and our loved ones, it creates a real and immediate sense of connection with the past in a way that facts and pure narratives can't really do for you. I think that this type of connection and the ability to humanize individuals is even more important when we think about more marginalized communities, because individuals in these communities do not necessarily have the agency in their lifetime to have control over their own stories. Even necessarily today, when we think about these more marginalized communities, sometimes we're limited in how we tell their stories because a lot of our sources can be from outside the community, not necessarily from the individuals themselves. But these family portraits are really moving and exceptional because they are these individuals choosing for themselves and their loved ones how they want to be seen, and it's them taking agency over their own legacies. So personally, I find these photos to be the most important and interesting images in our collection. So you and me, all of us, are someone's dead family. not to freak you out, but thinking about the concept of legacies, we are kind of in unprecedented times in the sense that all of us are going to exist probably long after we're gone as cold and impartial streams of data that are going to be on the internet forever and ever and ever. And while that's quite disturbing, I personally would like to think that when I'm no longer here, people will remember me for the content that I choose to create that represents my life from my perspective, and it shows my loved ones from the perspective of someone who cared about them. Yeah, and so when I look at these individuals in these photos, I have a real respect for them for trying to reach out through the past to communicate with us. And it also gives me a sense of real connection, and it reminds me that, you know, each of our lives is interesting and meaningful on its own, but also we have the great privilege of being a part of a much larger and very beautiful human story. So yeah, that's the end of my talk. Thank you for looking at these cool images with me. All of these images are available on our website. You can look at them. I'm in the process of cataloging them all for you, so hopefully you can enjoy them yourselves. Thank you. And now let's welcome our collections manager, Emily Coughlin.
Sorry, I am our shortest presenter today. Can everybody hear me? No? All right. How about now? Okay. All right. So as Grace said, I am the collections manager. My name is Emily. And I work with essentially all physical items that are not works on paper, unless it is artwork. So most of the things in the museum, I'm the one that has to take care of them. So this is just a quick little shot. I know you saw some of the organized chaos that is our collection. This is what it looks like when it is finally organized and put away. I wish it was always like this, but it's not the way it goes. But I decided to choose what is my favorite portion of our collection, and that is actually our artwork. So we have close to 400 paintings alone, not including drawings and other media. And for an art museum, okay, fine, that's kind of standard. But for a history museum, that's actually pretty rare, especially since a lot of those pieces depict Central Florida throughout history. But I've chosen 3 recent acquisitions to talk about today. So first up, we have work by the artist Jim Quinlan. He was born and raised in Sanford, went on to study at the Kansas City Art Institute, and then after some additional time, he was a staff artist for Walt Disney World. From there, he did a lot for Disney World, but he also continued to be an artist in his own right. He did several local shows. He was a well-respected watercolorist. And he also did some pieces that we have in our collection, which are all acrylic on board, and he used scenes from vintage postcards. So if you've ever seen the really cool old Central Florida vintage postcards, he recreated them and gave them new life. So this piece right here, it is untitled. We call it Picking Oranges in Florida. And you can see next to it, I actually used a postcard in our collection, and that is the postcard that he used to create the painting. We also were lucky enough, in the past year, we received 8 of his pieces from Regions National Bank, that used to be downtown. And they are all scenes from Orlando. You can see in the bottom corner, we have the skyline across Lake Eola. And one thing that's in that painting that no longer exists, it's a smaller picture, but if you can see it, it's the 1892 red brick courthouse. So if you haven't been to the History Center before, go to the 3rd floor, and the clock face from that building is actually on display there. It's built into a custom brick wall. And if you would like to see a few more of his pieces, we did a small exhibit in the lobby, but 3 of the paintings from that donation are actually on display on the 3rd floor of the library next door. They were just installed last week. So you can get the chance to see those. They're actually really cool. There's one with Rutland's in it, if anyone here remembers Rutland's. I wish it still existed, it was cool. Next up we have, this is probably my favorite painting in the entire collection. We got pretty lucky with this one. This is by Gilbert Salinas. He is from Puerto Rico. He was actually born in Boston, but when he was a child, his family moved back to Puerto Rico. And that's where he studied. He went to the University of Puerto Rico and he focused on an art concentration. He did specify that it was in plastics art, which was really interesting, which also kind of plays into his artwork. You can see it's abstraction. We have a picture of Gilbert right there. He's very sweet. He lives in Orlando. We were lucky enough, our historian Rachel did an oral history with him because he's part of a Puerto Rican artist collective. And then I was lucky enough to meet him and do an exhibit with him in a former position. And this painting was in it. My friend is actually his rep, and when I reached out and said, would you like to donate a painting? She said, there's no way you'll get what you want. And when we got it back to our storage site, I sent her a picture of it, and she was just absolutely flabbergasted that he parted with it because this was one of his favorites. It's called As We Speak. And his work is interesting because he looks into the dichotomy of both the human as a biological molecular piece, but also from a psychological standpoint and how society and psychology basically makes us the people that we are. To do these amazing canvases, he uses a lot of organic materials, palm fronds, sand. He used to smuggle palm fronds from Puerto Rico to Florida when he first started living here. And he used to bring sand from Puerto Rico because apparently we don't have that here. And he uses layers and layers and layers of acrylic paint, sometimes modeling paste. I wish I could have brought it with me today. It's huge. The layers of everything, it's basically a sculptural painting. If you look at it from the side, it's about this thick in some areas. It's still probably not even dry, honestly, and this painting is a few years old. But he does sketch out his work beforehand. I have a little picture of his sketchbook. And he just looks at organic forms and how it creates the human existence, and it's something that he's fascinated by. And he did a lot of these pieces during COVID. I teased him when I first met him. I saw a different piece, and I asked him if he liked UFOs and aliens, because the way the head of it was created, it looked more like an alien than a human. But I hope that someday this one will be on display here. It is, all of these paintings you can see on our website. And if you really, really want to see them, we might be able to bring them on site to make that happen for you. And the last artist I'm going to talk about is William Bill Bryan Park. He went by several names. Most commonly, everybody knew him as Bill. He was a bit of a local celebrity. This was actually a really recent acquisition. He passed away a few years ago, but his estate sale didn't happen until recently. And we were lucky enough to have quite a bit of things donated. He was a featured illustrator for The New Yorker. He worked for Houghton Mifflin Publishing, Condé Nast. He was in a bunch of their magazines. He did a lot of work for the Floridian, the Sentinel. And for 30 years, he was the artist in residence for the litigation journal for the American Bar Association, where each month he would create a satirical cover for the magazine. But he lived in Orlando. He had a business called, what is it called? He called it Park Art. It was in Orlando, and he was all over the place. He studied at the University of Florida, got his master's at the New York School for the Visual Arts in New York, worked in Atlanta, worked in New York, but he moved back home so he could marry his high school sweetheart, Evie. in 1961. So he stayed in this area, and I do have a few examples of his pieces. This lower one that is graphite on paper is a sketch from one of his cartoons. Unfortunately, he didn't label it, so I'm desperately going through old publications trying to find it. And he was best known for a series called Off the Leash. So he always joked that this is what he was born for. They are humorous cartoons using animals as metaphors for humans. So you can see up here, this was one that was in the Sentinel in about 2006. We have a pig at a diner bar, and it says, "1 BLT, hold the B." Or like, "I understand one of you is depressed," and it's the poor giraffe with its head down. We do have a few sketches of these, but unfortunately they're not the finished product, so it's hard to tell exactly where they ended up. Or they could have just been drawings that he did in his spare time. He did turn these into a book at one time before he passed away. And my favorite piece from this acquisition is actually this painting down here. So it's an abstract. We're going to speculate for a second. Those of us who have worked with it directly, cataloged it, photographed it, all of that, we're pretty sure it's a self-portrait. We actually found a picture yesterday of him laughing, and it looks almost the same. You've kind of got like the glasses around the eyes, the nose, the big toothy smile. But this is one of the things that I get to work with every day, besides the actual physical artifacts, like lists at the hazmat collection, things like that. We get to see some really cool artwork created by some very, very interesting people. Some are local, and some just have really great connections to Central Florida. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Travis.
All right, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed that. Let's have another round of applause for collections team. We have a few questions, and if you have anything you'd like to ask, please write it down on a sheet, and we can have somebody, Cheyenne probably, come over and take it from you. But the first one for Katie, if you'd like to come up and answer this one. What are some helpful tips for preserving family photo albums?
Family photo albums. They can be a little tricky. Honestly, if I am going to be honest, photo albums, especially the ones with the plastic covers and the adhesive, archivists cannot stand them. They're very hard to, you want to be able to stabilize. Yes, the scrapbook itself can be important because the creator created it a certain way for a reason. But if you are really focusing on preserving the photographs, my recommendation would be, if possible, to remove those photographs and put them in archival standard sleeves. If that is not on the table, you could, let's say you have a scrapbook and all the photographs are adhered to, the black construction paper. If you want to preserve that, I guess your options could be you could interleave each page with, I say, archival quality materials. So you need to focus on acid-free, polypropylene sleeves, things like that. You can use this acid-free paper to interleave the pages. And obviously, in Florida at least, it's kind of difficult, but to be able to put it in a dry, cool environment is also really, really important. Light is a photograph's one of its worst enemies. So those are just some tips. I don't know if, Emily, if you have any suggestions. No. Okay. That's it. Yeah, please don't. Yes, yeah. There's only so much we can do with a little spatula and everything.
So Katie actually answered a second question that we just got about archival boxes for storage and how do you protect photos from aging. I think she addressed those, but we do use archival non-acidic boxes to care for the paper collections that we do have. There's a question here that is about preserving film, And essentially, I think the gist of it is, what do we do about preserving film and at-risk media? So I wish our digital archivist were here to answer this question. It's a great one for her because that's really what she does. We have, at our off-site storage facility, we have a warehouse that contains very rare film from local TV stations, Channel 6, Channel 9, WMFE, that have been donated over the years so that we could care for them and preserve them, which we do. But we also digitize them so that they're not lost or inaccessible to history. So we have what we call a legacy lab full of machinery and technology that enables us to digitize these films, these tapes, many of which that haven't been seen since they were originally shot, you know, whether it was the 60s or 70s or 1980s. When we can't, either because they are too at risk for our capabilities or we don't have the machinery to do it ourselves, we send it out to professional agencies that can do that for us. They'll clean the films, they'll make sure it's digitized properly. It can be expensive, so we look for grants that will help us cover the costs, but we do have money that's built into our budget that we can provide for this digitization. And there will be one coming up on social media next month in time for the 50th anniversary of Richard Nixon's resignation. We recently found some on-the-street footage asking people what they thought about the impeachment. So that was kind of exciting to find. All right, thank you. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed our program.